So, getting back to the seemingly grassroots groups that the Koch brothers have funded and gotten off the ground, these groups are sometimes called astroturf because it's fake grassroots. How did that become part of their strategy?
Well, it goes way back. And in fact, I think one of the things that really caught my interest about them was that their story is such a big piece of American political history. They've been working at this project really since before 1980 when David Koch became vice president for the Libertarian presidential ticket. It was a miserable failure in 1980. They got 1% of the vote. And at that point, David Koch and his brother Charles Koch decided that if they wanted to have an impact on American politics, they were going to have to do something other than run for office. It was clear that their ideas did not do well in the marketplace of the ballot box. And so at that point, they kind of put their heads together with some other fellow travelers and decided that they were going to fund a complete infrastructure of organizations that were aimed at manufacturing political public opinion that mirrored their own. And so they set about doing this, and they've been doing it ever since, just absolutely pouring money into creating public opinion in all ways that you can do that, which is they funded think tanks, they funded publications, they fund academics, they give scholarships to students who will hold similar views as theirs. They fund a tremendous array of organizations, and they've actually founded a number of them themselves.
They founded the Cato Institute, the first libertarian think tank.
Absolutely, the Cato Institute has become a very powerful player in the area of shaping political opinion in the country. I mean, it's quoted all the time as a kind of a nonpartisan and impartial libertarian think tank. But it was founded by the Koch fortune and has been funded by it ever since.
Other think tanks that they've had a lot to do with in terms of funding?
One of the more important, kind of less well-known but very important ones is something called the Mercatus Center, which is at George Mason University in Northern Virginia. And it is a think tank that is very targeted in its approach, basically aimed at gutting all kinds of federal regulations, particularly environmental regulations. And it's been instrumental in attacking the EPA, for instance, which again is something that dovetails really nicely with Koch Industries' interests because they're constantly at war with the EPA over their pollution problems.
You said that the Koch brothers created these think tanks to manufacture public opinion. What do you mean by manufacture public opinion?
That reflects, again, reporting I've done. One of the people that I interviewed is a environmental lawyer who tangled with this Mercatus Center a lot. And the way that lawyer put it was that the center was set up almost to kind of launder economics. Businesses come, and the industry comes, it donates money to the Mercatus Center. The Mercatus Center then has pedigreed scholars who write papers, and the papers almost always come out promoting whatever the point of view is of the industry. So it's kind of a way of taking industry money and turning it into what looks like impartial academic support, but is actually funded by the industry.
Now, you say that at some point the Koch brothers realized that think tanks weren't enough to affect the changes that they wanted, and they needed a mechanism to deliver the message to the public and rally the public around their causes. And at that point, in 1984, they created Citizens for a Sound Economy, which became very vocal during the Clinton administration. So what was Citizens for a Sound Economy?
Well, Citizens for a Sound Economy was a prototype, really, for the current organization they have, the Americans for Prosperity. And what you were reading was actually, this is a quote from Matt Kibbe, who was involved at the time and is a Republican political operative. He's now very involved in the Tea Party movement. He was explaining the roots of this kind of activism. It's corporate-sponsored activism. These organizations usually have the names of citizens this or citizens that, such as, Citizens for a Sound Economy. But in fact, they're underwritten by corporate interests. And so that was what that organization did. Was it, again, was particularly involved in energy policy. It opposed a tax that Clinton was proposing at the time on BTU, and it actually succeeded in killing it. The proposed tax went down to defeat after Citizens for Sound Economy much like the current Tea Party movement, started organizing rallies in the streets and loud protests in front of Congress and pouring money in to oppose politicians who supported this new tax on energy.
Although the Koch brothers are libertarians and they think government should be stripped to its most minimal role, you say they've been great beneficiaries of government money. Their companies have gotten about $100 million in government contracts since 2000.
That's right. So there's a certain amount of hypocrisy in this libertarian notion. And in fact, there have been some more kind of purist libertarian thinkers who have attacked the Kochs for exactly this, for kind of disguising their corporate self-interest as a kind of a lofty libertarian philosophy. They were also, I think, tremendous beneficiaries during the Bush years of the 2005 energy bill, which was a tremendous giveaway of subsidies and tax breaks to various energy companies.
President Obama has mentioned Americans for Prosperity, a group that David Koch co-founded, at least once. And you quote that. And this was after the Citizens United ruling, which struck down laws prohibiting direct corporate spending on campaigns, on political campaigns. President Obama warned that this had made it easier for big companies to hide behind, quote, groups with harmless-sounding names like Americans for Prosperity. They don't have to say who exactly Americans for Prosperity are. You don't know if it's a foreign-controlled corporation or a big oil company, unquote. As we speak, the Americans for Prosperity website has a headline, President Obama insults Americans for Prosperity's 1.2 million activists. Has President Obama talked about Americans for Prosperity and its major corporate funding outside of this, and the paradox behind, big corporate powers funding seemingly grassroots movements?
Well, I think he also gave a radio address where he mentioned them. So I think maybe he's mentioned them now twice. And I managed for the story to get an interview with David Axelrod, his senior advisor, who expressed a certain amount of frustration, which is, I think, maybe why the White House is beginning to sort of pipe up on the subject a little bit. I mean, their feeling is that a lot of the media has taken the sort of Tea Party rebellion at face value as just kind of an outpouring naturally into the streets, and without looking far enough into the corporate interests underlying some of it. And so what David Axelrod told me was, what they don't tell you is that it's a grassroots uprising that's funded by a couple oil billionaires. And they are hoping, it seems, that people will pay more attention to the huge and powerful interests that are really underlying a lot of the opposition to Obama.
Now, I want to mention that the Koch brothers also support a lot of arts and medical institutions. They've done great philanthropic work with the American Ballet Theater, Lincoln Center, the Museum of Natural History, Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. So I think it's important that we mention that.
Yeah, David Koch is really one of the primary philanthropists in New York City at this point. He gave $100 million to renovate the State Theater in Lincoln Center, and he's on the board of the most prestigious cultural organizations in the city, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Natural History Museum. And so it's interesting. I mean, and particularly as a writer for The New Yorker, it was interesting for me to sort of connect the dots between that philanthropic role that he plays and this really sort of brass knuckles political role. It's almost as if they're kind of two David Kochs, and it's interesting to kind of put the pieces together.
Did you find a connection?
Well, at a certain point in his life, I think it was in around 1991, he had a near-death experience where he nearly died in a plane crash, and then he was also coincidentally diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he began to re-examine his life to some extent. And it was at that point he started to give away really spectacular amounts of money, particularly to cancer research and particularly to prostate cancer research. I think that David Koch has, you don't want to take that away from him. But at the same time, I have to say one of the things that really shocked me in doing the reporting on this family was that at the same time that David Koch has been, sort of portraying himself as such a champion of the fight against cancer and actually has given a tremendous amount of money to that fight, his company produces a chemical, formaldehyde, in many, many, many products, and they produce it in huge quantities, which the U.S. government has been trying to regulate as a known carcinogen in human beings. And the Koch Industries, through its Georgia Pacific subsidiary, produces tons of formaldehyde and puts it into tons of products, particularly things like plywood and laminates. And the company's been fighting the regulation of formaldehydes, trying to hold off the EPA from keeping it from flowing freely into the marketplace. And, I just don't know how they can reconcile these two roles.